I just want to ask a sort of a fundamental philosophical question. And that is, do you believe that the federal government has a responsibility to ensure that all children, rural children, urban, rich, poor, special needs, have access to quality education?
That is certainly the goal of the president. He has said that he wants to make sure that there is equal access to quality education for every student in our country, which is why he is such a proponent of school choice. He doesn't believe that any child should be trapped in a failing school, that we should have parents have the ability to choose where their children can be able to go to school so that if they are in a failing school, they have an opportunity to have better education somewhere else, that they have the tools to be able to do that.
But if I may, it's a goal of the president, but is it a federal responsibility to ensure that every child in America has access to a good education?
I think that was the purpose of public education when we first began it in our country.
Resist much, obey little. Once unquestioning obedience, once fully enslaved. Once fully enslaved, no nation, state, city of this earth ever afterward resumes its liberty.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Quisha King Show. I am Quisha King, and we're talking about the Department of Education. What you just saw there was Linda McMahon, who is the Secretary of the Department of Education right now in the Trump administration. And that question was very important. When Dana Bash asked the Secretary about the federal government's right to educate children. And she said that that's why the public schooling system was started in the first place. Let's see if she's right.
As the first secretary of the State Board of Education, Horace Mann promoted his new concept that the state is the father of children. He stressed that it was the responsibility of the state to ensure that education was provided for the child.
In a sense, Linda McMahon is correct, which is why I am bringing you this video today. I want you to understand that the American public education system was never meant to educate your child. Have you ever looked at your child and wondered, why are their grades like this? Like, you see the beauty in your child, you see the brilliance in your own child, but then when it comes to the schooling part, you see it and you see how they've declined. Their curiosity is gone. They're not as interested in learning. Why?
After reading through the educational models of different countries, Mann finally hears about a particularly successful style that had been developed in Prussia, which is now modern-day Germany. The Prussian system had shown to be such a success for the government's purposes that, accompanied by a few other educators, Horace Mann travels to Germany to investigate. Upon their return to the United States, they lobbied heavily to have the Prussian model adopted.
All in favor, say aye.
During the next 30 years or so, a whole line of American dignitaries came to Germany to earn degrees. Interestingly enough, those who earned degrees in Germany came back to the United States to staff all the major universities. By 1900, all the PhDs in the United States were trained in Prussia.
Why would their interest in learning stop when you put them in public school? The reason for that is that the public school system was not meant to educate. In fact, I think we first need to understand that schooling and education are two totally different things. Schooling is just basically a place where teachers can teach. Now, what they teach is the part where the education is supposed to come in. But the public schooling system was never meant to educate. Therefore, when the teachers come in, they are meant to indoctrinate. They were sent there to make your children little soldiers for the state.
Public schooling is viewed as one of the shining lights of the modern Western world. Who could question the value of an institution that provides free and compulsory education for all? But beneath the veneer presented by the bureaucrats that run this institution, a darker reality emerges. The state-run school systems in the West were modeled off the factory style of education first introduced in Prussia in the early 1700s. What shocks, writes Gatto, is that we should so eagerly have adopted one of the very worst aspects of Prussian culture, an educational system deliberately designed to produce mediocre intellects, to hamstring the inner life, to deny students appreciable leadership skills, and to ensure docile and incomplete citizens, all in order to render the populace manageable, or as John Taylor Gatto, a former teacher turned one of public schooling's greatest critics, writes, "Schools are intended to produce formulaic human beings whose behavior can be predicted and controlled. To a very great extent, schools succeed in doing this, but in a national order in which the only successful people are independent, self-reliant, confident, and individualistic, the products of schooling are irrelevant. Well-schooled people are irrelevant. They can sell film and razor blades, push paper and talk on telephones, or sit mindlessly before a flickering computer terminal. But as human beings, they are useless. Useless to others and useless to themselves."
This system of creating soldiers was started in Prussia and then imported into the United States. Well documented and well known. That is why, after just 10 years of the public schooling system being in place, American education started to decline. Then in 1979, when the Department of Education came to be, just 4 years after its creation, 23 million Americans were functionally illiterate, okay, by the simplest test of everyday reading, writing, and comprehension. But before public schooling, 80% of men and 50% of women were literate in New England around the time of America's founding. And just and of course it was lower than that in the South, but 80% of men and 50% of women were literate. And now, even though we have spent $3 trillion overall pouring into the public schooling system, what do we have to show for it? We have schools in Illinois, 30 schools in Illinois that cannot pass basic math and reading tests, but they are graduating. And because of the communist infiltration into all of our institutions, the public schooling system was the perfect place for communists to come in, indoctrinate the teachers, and then they turn around and indoctrinate your child. Bella Dodd, who wrote the book School of Darkness, rose to the high ranks in the Communist Party here in America. And she details in her book, School of Darkness, how she used the teachers' unions to get more teachers into communism, bring them into this ideology, organize them, and then turn the next generation into communists themselves. Because of the communist infiltration into all of Americans, our institutions, and particularly in the schooling institution, it was the perfect place for communists to covertly expound their plan. But who would the communists use to disseminate their information to the next generation? How would they get this done? That's where the teachers' unions come in. And with the creation of the Department of Education, the National Education Association and Department of Education, through Jimmy Carter, made a backroom deal, bringing teachers' unions, which were now completely controlled by communists, in bed with the federal government. And there we have children being indoctrinated with communist ideas, all set up by the federal government. Terry Herndon, who was the executive director of the NEA, was asked, is the department then a creature of the NEA? And she says, that's true. There'd be no department without the NEA, because Jimmy Carter wanted the endorsement of the largest teachers union in America when he was running for president. So this was all political smoke and mirrors. It was nothing. The creation of the Department of Education was nothing about your children and nothing about their education at all. It was to help Jimmy Carter get reelected. So the communists used this and took over the institution, the schooling institution. And I think it was the final nail in the coffin, because this is where all of that, the DEI, the social emotional learning, all of these communist ideas were able to get funding for implementing these ideas into the K through 12 system. This is why it is so difficult to get people to understand that this Department of Education and public schooling and all these things aren't really educating your kids, even though we see the data. What do you call something when you see the data? You know it's not benefiting what it set out to benefit. We can see that the kids are functionally illiterate, even worse than in the 80s. Even though we see all of this information, why is there still an effort to keep these systems in place if it's not benefiting you?
And the Republicans consistently say defund, defund, and they don't want to make the investments, and therefore we end up in the situation that we're in. But they did not have an answer for why it would make sense to get rid of the Department of Education.
You have to begin to ask yourself, what is the goal? Because clearly the goal is not to educate the children, because the children are there. They've been sitting in these institutions for decades, getting dumber and dumber, and nobody's doing anything about it. Now Trump comes along and says, you know what? Let's get rid of the Department of Education, and everybody wants to flip out. Why would you flip out to get rid of something that's not working? It doesn't make sense. It is time for us to stop romanticizing the public school system, the Department of Education, and these institutions that are Johnny-come-latelys and just being implemented without understanding what their function was and how they were created and what they were really put there to do. It's really up to us. We can either continue to have a dumbed down American citizenry, or you can do something about it. Bella Dodd herself has summarized in her book, in her testimony before Congress, that they knew that since they had organized the teachers' unions, that they could infiltrate the schools. And she personally helped communist operatives into American classrooms to mold the minds of children towards Marxist ideology. And I don't care what nobody say. If you can't tell me what a woman is, you definitely do not need to be in control of schooling or education. Let me know what you think about what I think in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.